illustrates some of the challenges that Bible translators face in the original Greek language and culture. Brothers covered both the male and female, and we know that was Paul's intention because he actually later on in the epistles would address directly female members of the congregation by name. However, in translating that to English, that is a challenge because if we simply do a literal translation, go from adelphoi, which is the Greek word, to brothers, we're suggesting that Paul is addressing only the male members of the congregation. If we use something like brothers and sisters, we are strictly adding a word which was originally not there. So it's quite a challenge, and sometimes there is unhelpful controversy. Now, Bible translators these days seem to get round this by choosing one of the options and providing a footnote to explain what is going on. So something like the standard version will simply use brothers, but then we'll provide a footnote to say that in the original that would be seen to cover the female members of the congregation too. And something like the NIV, for example, will go for brothers and sisters, and then provide a footnote explaining that sisters is not in the original and the rationale for her decision. Either way, we are blessed by good translations, and we should just recognize with graciousness some of the difficult decisions they have to make. Paul wishes his brothers and sisters in the church to know that what has happened to him, his imprisonment, has served to advance the cause of the gospel. And this is not something which would be necessarily obvious. After all, Paul was an itinerant preacher, traveling from place to place, planting churches, discipling believers. Apparently, nothing would have hindered his ministry more than to be locked up 24/7, chained next to a soldier. And yet, there's a way that this was true even beyond what Paul could have imagined, because after all, one of his great legacies and contributions to his to the Christian faith, have been his epistles, and many of them were actually written during time of imprisonment. And maybe if he hadn't been imprisoned, he wouldn't have been so productive in his writing. So it's curious to see how what Paul says actually was true in ways that he could not fathom. For those who believe that Paul wrote this epistle whilst in Rome, the reference to the imperial guard, the praetorium in this verse is considered significant. These were Caesar's bodyguards. They were an elite troop, and some scholars suggest that they were stationed in Rome and where Caesar was, and therefore that would be evidence that the epistle was composed while Paul was in arrest in Rome. Others suggest that the evidence is more ambiguous, that the Praetorian might have also been stationed in large cities elsewhere in the Roman Empire, such as Ephesus. Independent of where he was imprisoned, Paul is nonetheless grateful that what has happened to him has served the cause of the gospel, because now even those whom he is arrested with, the guards who are looking after him, and others they are in contact with, everyone knows that Paul is arrested because of Jesus Christ, and in that way the gospel of Jesus Christ is also being spread. In the culture of the ancient world, much shaped by honor and shame, one fear Paul would probably have had is that some of those close to him would have become ashamed by his arrest and might even have turned their back on him and even on the gospel. And we look elsewhere in the epistles, we realize that this did actually happen. And even some people whom he considered quite close friends turned their back on him when he was arrested. Nonetheless, he's saying here that actually, if you think about most of the brothers, most Christians, not all, but most, have actually his arrest has had the opposite effect on them. Instead of turning their back on Paul and the gospel, they have seen Paul's example and faithfulness and actually have been encouraged to spread the gospel and share their faith fearlessly. And actually, therefore, the gospel is being preached much more than if it had been just Paul preaching the word.